In July 2018, Indonesia imposed a temporary block on TikTok, removing the app from local stores and disrupting roughly 10 million users overnight. Authorities framed the move as a response to blasphemy and pornography complaints, citing objections from religious groups and regional officials. Because the ban targeted content rather than data flows, regulators demanded faster takedowns and stricter local moderation practices. The government lifted the restriction after about 1 week, a short but high-impact interruption that froze creators' uploads and marketing campaigns. Meanwhile, TikTok responded by deploying local moderation teams and policy changes to speed content review and appease regulators. The week-long episode forced ByteDance to expand Indonesian language moderation teams and implement stricter age verification measures to reduce the volume of flagged content. Therefore, regulators framed the outcome as a compromise. Censorship softened in exchange for operational changes and faster local removals. For creators, the interruption highlighted fragility. Platform access could vanish on short notice, so many diversified to Instagram and YouTube. In Indonesia, the episode set a template for future disputes: negotiate local moderation, accept operational oversight, and avoid prolonged blanket bans where possible. In 2018, Bangladesh's telecom regulator begins blocking apps during a wider anti-porn campaign, targeting platforms critics call immoral. Because religious leaders and conservative politicians pressure authorities, regulators order app removals and temporary network blocks to curb explicit content. The action affects creators and ordinary users, interrupts uploads and live streams, and forces platforms to change moderation policies under threat of further blocks. Meanwhile, officials frame the move as public morality enforcement rather than censorship, and the first crackdown sets a precedent for future interventions. By 2021, regulators launch additional crackdowns after police and prosecutors link certain videos to local crimes and social disorder. Because authorities point to clips they say glamorize theft, assault, and underage behavior, they single out TikTok for repeated notices and temporary removals. Platforms respond by increasing takedowns, adding local complaint hotlines, and promising stricter age verification, yet enforcement remains inconsistent and often opaque. For creators, the pattern produces uncertainty. Many lose income during takedowns, while others pivot to private messaging apps or YouTube for audience stability. The recurring bans illustrate how digital morality policing can cycle, with short-term compliance traded for operational concessions rather than durable content reforms. On June 29, 2020, New Delhi orders a nationwide ban on 59 Chinese apps, including TikTok, immediately removing them from Indian app stores. Officials justify the move by citing national security and alleged user data misuse, framing the ban as a defensive action against foreign surveillance. TikTok has more than 200 million Indian users, so the ban severs a critical market and halts creator monetization overnight. ByteDance suffers massive valuation pressure, promptly losing roughly $6 billion in corporate value as investors reprice geopolitical risk. Because New Delhi treats data jurisdiction as sovereignty, the ban establishes a hard precedent other governments later cite when evaluating Chinese-owned apps. The immediate climax comes as influencers, brands, and advertisers lose access to a market that accounts for substantial content engagement and regional ad spend. Therefore, creators scramble to migrate audiences to Instagram and YouTube, and many small businesses report abrupt revenue drops within days. Meanwhile, international policymakers view India's action as a model, which increases scrutiny in Washington and fuels congressional inquiries into app security. In result, ByteDance restructures risk plans, accelerates data localization talks, and intensifies lobbying while other governments study the playbook. On August 6 and August 14, 2020, the Trump administration issues executive orders targeting TikTok and WeChat, citing national security risks tied to Chinese data access. Officials assert that Beijing could compel ByteDance to hand over U.S. user data, so the orders seek to block transactions and force divestiture of American operations. The orders place roughly 100 million American accounts at risk, disrupting creators, influencers, and advertisers who rely on the platform's distribution and monetization tools. Because the administration frames this as a geopolitical security move rather than a content moderation issue, legal fights and public debate escalate quickly. President Trump pressures Oracle and Walmart to structure a deal that would keep TikTok operational in the U.S. while transferring critical functions to American companies. ByteDance negotiates a proposed partnership where Oracle handles cloud services and Walmart takes a minority role in commerce, though ByteDance resists a full sale. The legal climax arrives when federal courts issue injunctions that block enforcement of the orders, citing executive overreach and insufficient statutory authority. Therefore, creators keep posting, regulators keep demanding transparency, and the episode cements a new reality. Geopolitics can pause a platform's economy without shutting down its viral dances. In October 2020, Pakistan's telecom regulator orders its first nationwide ban on TikTok, citing court rulings that classify the app's videos as immoral and indecent. Officials highlight content that promotes obscenity, gambling, and religious disrespect as justification, responding to complaints from conservative groups and politicians. Because TikTok lacks a strong local moderation framework at the time, regulators treat the block as leverage to push for structural changes. The ban disrupts millions of daily users and sparks protests from young creators who rely on short-form video for income and social visibility. TikTok responds by pledging stronger filters, quicker takedowns, and direct collaboration with regulators to enforce community guidelines more tightly. Therefore, the initial ban lifts, but authorities repeat the cycle 3 more times by 2021, creating a pattern of suspension and restoration. Each reinstatement follows new promises from TikTok, but enforcement disputes resurface whenever controversial videos trend. Meanwhile, creators adapt by cross-posting to Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts, hedging against sudden outages that erase revenue streams overnight. The repeated swings show how Pakistan uses regulatory bans as a pressure tactic, forcing concessions without ever fully removing the app from its market. In April 2022, the Taliban enforces a nationwide ban on TikTok and PUBG Mobile, citing a need to protect cultural and religious norms. Officials state the platforms mislead the generation and corrupt youth morals, framing the ban as a public morality measure rather than a technical security action. Because videos of lip syncs, dances, and gaming streams attract large youth audiences, authorities argue these formats accelerate moral erosion and social disorder. The action immediately cuts off a major distribution channel for Afghan creators and activists, shutting down informal news and entertainment circuits overnight. Enforcement includes takedowns and ISP-level filtering, and Taliban media ministries demand platform compliance with content standards and immediate removals. Because international companies cannot operate freely under the regime, TikTok cannot negotiate local moderation effectively, leaving many users dependent on VPNs and peer-to-peer sharing. Therefore, creators shift to encrypted channels like Telegram and messaging apps to distribute content, and diaspora networks amplify Afghan stories abroad. Meanwhile, the ban signals a broader clampdown on digital culture. International rights groups warn this narrows civic space and complicates humanitarian communication. On November 13, 2023, Nepal's government orders a ban on TikTok, saying the app disrupts social harmony and damages family structures. Officials remove the app from Nepali app stores immediately, cutting access for roughly 2.2 million local users almost overnight. Because regulators frame the issue as social stability rather than data security, they demand system-level compliance instead of targeted takedowns. The climax arrives as creators and small businesses lose distribution, advertisers freeze campaigns, and civil society groups decry the blanket restriction as censorship. Rights organizations promptly protest the measure, warning it creates a troubling precedent for online expression. TikTok signals willingness to cooperate, but because Kathmandu insists on firmer local controls, negotiations initially stall and many users turn to VPNs and alternative platforms. Therefore, the ban exerts immediate pressure on ByteDance to promise operational changes, including faster removals and a local liaison to help law enforcement. The result comes in August 2024 when the government lifts the ban after ByteDance agrees to establish a focal unit for real-time cooperation on cybercrime and content moderation. Meanwhile, the episode convinces regional policymakers that compliance and local partnerships can end bans, but it also proves political risk still widens for foreign-owned platforms. For Nepali creators, the interruption highlights platform fragility and accelerates audience migration to other apps for income stability. On May 17, 2023, Montana Governor Greg Gianforte signs a bill making his state the first in the U.S. to impose an outright TikTok ban. The law authorizes fines of up to $10,000 per day for app stores that offer TikTok within state borders, effectively targeting distribution rather than individual users. Because the measure frames TikTok as a national security risk linked to Beijing, supporters portray it as a state-level defense against foreign surveillance. The ban is scheduled to take effect on January 1, 2024, creating a countdown that intensifies debate among lawmakers, tech companies, and civil liberties groups. TikTok immediately sues the Montana government, arguing the law violates First Amendment protections and exceeds state authority over interstate commerce. Federal courts respond by blocking enforcement before the effective date, stating the statute likely conflicts with constitutional free expression rights. Therefore, the legal clash shifts from local regulation to a broader test of whether states can legislate national security matters traditionally handled in Washington. Meanwhile, Montana's move serves as a political symbol, showing how one state attempts to confront a global platform, even if courts ultimately stall enforcement. For U.S. users, the episode demonstrates how regional actions can spark nationwide debates, keeping TikTok's future in legal limbo. By March 2023, the White House signals stronger action against TikTok when senators introduce the Restrict Act, a bill designed to expand executive authority over foreign-owned technology. This follows an earlier measure from December 2022 that already banned TikTok from federal government devices, citing cybersecurity risks across agencies with millions of employees. Because lawmakers frame the platform as a national security vulnerability tied to Beijing, the bill attracts bipartisan attention and widens pressure on the Biden administration to act decisively. The debate moves beyond app moderation into the broader question of whether Washington should restrict or even outlaw Chinese technology at scale. That same month, TikTok CEO Xu Zaichu testifies before the House Energy and Commerce Committee in a marathon hearing lasting over 5 hours. Lawmakers deliver 118 separate questions, pressing him on user data flows, content moderation, and ByteDance's corporate structure under Chinese law. Because Xu struggles to provide firm assurances about Chinese government influence, both Democrats and Republicans highlight the risks of leaving the app unregulated. Therefore, Congress reframes TikTok less as a youth culture tool and more as a national security test case. Meanwhile, creators and brands keep producing viral content, but the hearing makes clear that TikTok's survival in the U.S. depends on political decisions as much as market performance. In February 2023, the European Commission orders all staff to remove TikTok from official devices, citing cybersecurity concerns tied to potential Chinese access to sensitive data. The directive applies across the Commission, the Council, and later the European Parliament, covering thousands of employees who handle policy, negotiations, and classified information. Because the EU frames the decision as a precaution against espionage, the move mirrors earlier bans on U.S. federal devices in 2022 and Canadian government phones in early 2023. The order requires deletion of the app by March 15, leaving little room for exceptions or delay. The action signals that Brussels, often slower than Washington in technology crackdowns, now treats platform security as a matter of strategic governance. Therefore, TikTok faces coordinated pressure on multiple continents, with its access to official devices curtailed in markets that collectively regulate hundreds of millions of consumers. Meanwhile, European officials insist the ban is not a step toward removing TikTok from public use, but rights groups warn the logic could justify broader restrictions later. For ByteDance, the result is clear. Even without a consumer ban, losing access to policymakers' devices widens the narrative that TikTok represents systemic security risk in the West. In August 2023, Senegal's government orders telecom operators to block TikTok nationwide after protests erupt over opposition leader Ousmane Sonko's arrest. Authorities argue the platform spreads disinformation and mobilizes unrest faster than traditional media, amplifying street clashes in Dakar and other cities. Because TikTok has become a primary outlet for activists and youth groups, the ban immediately disrupts political communication and limits real-time documentation of demonstrations. The decision highlights how a single government directive can silence a widely used protest tool within hours. The shutdown lasts several weeks before officials partially lift restrictions, allowing access under closer monitoring but warning that renewed unrest could trigger another suspension. Therefore, Senegal joins a growing list of governments that treat TikTok not only as a cultural platform, but also as a political amplifier subject to state control. Meanwhile, international observers warn the move sets a precedent in West Africa, where digital platforms play a central role in youth-driven opposition movements. For TikTok, the result is clear. Its position as a protest tool places it in direct conflict with regimes seeking tighter control over information flow. In August 2023, Somalia's Ministry of Communications orders an immediate nationwide ban on TikTok, pairing it with restrictions on Telegram and the betting site 1xBet. Officials justify the decision by citing the spread of what they call horrific content, including graphic violence and propaganda videos linked to militant groups. Because Somalia has endured decades of conflict and weak state authority, leaders argue that unregulated platforms provide a powerful channel for extremist messaging. The timing underscores a government effort to tighten information control while continuing its military campaign against al-Shabaab insurgents. The ban strikes hardest among Somali youth, where TikTok consistently ranks as one of the most downloaded and widely used apps for news, music, and social exchange. Therefore, the government's action not only cuts off extremist content but also removes one of the few platforms where young people openly share culture and political criticism. Meanwhile, critics warn that lumping TikTok together with gambling sites risks conflating security concerns with moral policing. The result is a precedent where fragile states equate digital influence with national security threats, leaving citizens with fewer online spaces for expression. If you enjoyed this, I'm going to be posting a lot here. I would greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe. Thanks for watching.